It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the roguish Robert Begley, who's off the reservation and wreaking havoc with the villains of the world. So, how you doing? How you doing this afternoon, Robert?
Andy, I told
Yeah,
you we always end with the
salute.
salute. Today, I want to start with the salute to one of the greatest generals in American history.
The great blood, guts, and glory, George Patton.
That is
Yes,
right. Uh,
and and
what a man, what a story.
right, right. A little bit crazy, but he was just a tremendous combat general. And we'll focus on World War II. We'll do the backstory. We'll focus on World War II, but I think we should say I think a lot of people dislike Patton, who because he was he could be a really abrasive, swearing, profane kind of guy. He and flamboyant. But I think the people in the best situation to judge his martial abilities were his opponents, the Germans, who had to fight against him. And I think they generally considered Patton certainly the best American commander and maybe the best Allied commander overall, although they certainly respected Montgomery as well. But maybe Patton number one. And and I think for
Yes,
little,
except
I
for
don't know.
Hitler,
Yeah,
who called him a wild cowboy. Rommel knew how good he was, but Hitler actually just kind of dismissed him and referred to him as a wild cowboy. But I agree with you, though. They feared him. They
right.
definitely feared him.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Phantom Army at Dover that the Allies set up, because the Germans feared Patton
Yes,
so much. I think at the end of the war, von Rundstedt, one of the leading German generals, said simply about Patton, "He's the best you got." And
that's
I think
right.
he's talking about I think he's talking about the Allies more broadly than just the Americans. Although, like I said, Montgomery was a great field command, who was also respected and feared by the Germans. But yeah,
Yes,
perhaps Patton preeminently. Anyhow, we need to do some of the backstory before we get to the tremendous heroism of World
sure.
War II. So before you get started, I'll just say Patton's dates were 1885 to 1945, and comes out of a distinguished family, a military family, doesn't he?
Military family that he traces directly to Hugh Mercer, who died under George Washington's command during the Revolutionary War. He died at Princeton and Mercer Street in New York City. I'm sure you know that, Andy, downtown in the
I
West
didn't. No,
Village.
I didn't know that was named after one of
That's
Patton's
who it is.
ancestors.
Yeah,
I
General
didn't know that.
Mercer.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right,
yeah. They actually say that in the Hamilton musical. They uncover that. But
okay.
and then General Mercer's grandson was the first George S. Patton, who died in the Civil War fighting for the Confederates. I think it was Pickett's Run, where he died. His son, George Patton, there was no war for him to fight, but when he gave birth in 1885 to George S. Patton, he grew up telling him as a boy he was steeped in the lore of storytelling about the family tradition, the family heritage, and also the Iliad, the Odyssey, the victories of Napoleon and Alexander. So, if there ever was a man, Andy, who was bred to win at war, it's George S. Patton. Absolutely. And I think one of the two things that happened in his early years, he had dyslexia, so he was not good at reading himself, and it forced him to struggle. So it gave him some kind of endurance, persistence, the ability to persist, and the ability to listen. He was very good at listening and hearing and boiling things down to essentials, just coming from hearing all these stories in his childhood. So that was the first segment of his life
Mhm.
that we could mention.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and he was, he was a little bit crazy. Believed in reincarnation, and and thought that he was the reincarnation of various great generals throughout history. But uh, but whatever, it certainly that may even have spurred his his trademark aggressive style that he was gonna live up to or
Yes,
even excel his glorious what not even his predecessors, who he had been in a previous life, and he was going to
that's right.
excel. But yeah, we'll get to that shortly. Virginia Military Institute, right, and then the United States Military
That's
Academy at West Point.
That's right. He's 17 years old, goes to VMI. That's 1903, 1904. And again, he's great. He's physically fit. He's great on the field, but not good at reading and writing. Goes to West Point. He fails at math, but eventually graduates in 1909. And uh, from there, he's happy to be in the place where he wants to be. Military training is all he's about. His peers don't like him because all he's saying is, I'm going to be a great general. So he had a
Well,
healthy ego.
I already have been. I already have been in previous lives. Right? I wonder how that went against with
Right.
his peers.
Hmm.
It's
Then
interesting though that he had dyslexia and struggled to read because he was a voracious reader, wasn't he? All this
yes, he
military
was
history
later in
that
life.
he read.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, later in life, his library went to West Point. So he just dealt with it. He knew the value of knowing, and even Rommel, one of the scenes from the movie, Rommel, I read your book, right?
You
One of the famous
magnificent bastard, he says. You magnificent bastard, I read your book. Yeah, which he probably said in real life, knowing Patton,
Yes,
because Patton was a
yes.
vulgar, profane kind of guy. Not everybody's cup of tea, Robert. He's
Well,
not going to.
vulgar, but also very religious too. Like he was in many senses a walking contradiction because he had the sacred
Right.
and the profane, and
That's
so
right. It's a chapter title from Atlas Shrugged, right?
yeah, we know that reference, right?
Right.
So just moving on, 1912,
Well, wait, just
he
just
goes
let
to
me
the
interject for a
Olympics.
second. Wait.
Yeah,
Let
go
me
ahead.
interject for a second. Because, by the way, everybody out there in Hero Land, if you haven't seen the film Patton, which I think was 1970, right? George George C. Scott
1970 Best
wasn't he?
Picture.
Yeah,
Yes,
and didn't George C. Scott win the Oscar for Best
absolutely,
Actor
hands
and
down.
then turn it
Yes.
down and then turn it down? But did it? But anyhow, uh, they start off with that profanity laced famous speech of Patton's. But yeah, he was religious. The one thing I wanted to mention here from the film, I probably accurate in real life, knowing who Patton was. You mentioned he was a religious man as well as his blood and guts commander. And one scene in the film, this I think it was a clergyman asked him, "So, General, do you read the Bible?" And Patton says, "Every goddamn day." I mean, he's just captured.
It does. It absolutely does. So while he's still relatively young, 1912, he goes to Sweden to the Olympics for the pentathlon. And Andy, one thing I didn't know was when the modern Olympics came back, a, one of the I think the impetus for it was for military training. So they had shooting, they had horse steeplechases, horseback riding, swimming, running, other things that modern athletes do. But but Patton trained on the boat ride over. Basically, he finished fifth, and the four Swedes were the ones. So he in that
And
contest.
he disputed one of the
Yes,
pistol shots, right?
the pistol shot he said went through the bullseye, and then he shot again and it went through the same hole, and he would have won a medal if that
Right.
because he ended up way down on the pistol shooting category. But here's also the sportsmanship. He accepted the defeat. He didn't complain. He didn't run to the refs. And once it was done, he was like, okay, that's it. Then he stays after the Olympics. He stays in France with the best swordsman, the best
But
fencer.
hold on a
And
second. Hold on a
yeah,
second. Let me mention
okay, go
one
ahead.
thing about the Olympics. So we're in Stockholm, 1912 Olympics. Swedes place 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Patton 5. Is there a little hometown favoritism? Pardon me for being a little cynical, but I'm a Cold War kid, and I know growing up, watching the Olympics in the 1960s and 70s, that if there were Iron Curtain judges, East European or Russian,
Yes.
communist judges, then no American had a chance to to win. You had to be in a you had to be in an event where it isn't judged. Where like you're running in track and field, or you're putting the shot, or you're in the ring fighting, where you can knock somebody out. Because if you have to go to judges, the Iron Curtain, the judges from behind the Iron Curtain would never be fair. They would never be objective.
Yeah,
I learned that
that's
very
true.
often. I don't know if it was
He
the same
did
in Sweden
though.
in 1912.
Right, I'm not sure, but here's one competitive flaw he made. He didn't do anything the day before the event, and Sweden at that time, it was in July, they had 1 hour of nightfall. So Patton didn't really even sleep. So he went there exhausted. He went to the competition exhausted. During the race, he fell down. One of the events, he fell down, got a concussion, and was actually out for a few hours, and still went on to compete. So his medal was just incredible, and his endurance. And so these were all things that he was less disappointed in not coming home with the medal. Again, it wasn't the thing that it is today, scientific training. I mean, they never would have let him just do nothing the day before. They would have had him had a good night's sleep, all these
Yeah, sure.
modern regiments. But nevertheless, afterwards, he stays in
Well,
France.
one of his contemporaries, that we honored on the Hero Show, Babe Ruth, he certainly trained. He'd be out all night before the event, carousing, drinking with 4 or 5 different women and everything. But okay, different training methods back then.
Yes, you're right. You're right. But in fact, the Frenchman who won the fencing contest, he only lost to one person throughout the whole trial, and it was Patton. And Patton asked him afterwards, who's the best fencer in France? He tells him, and Patton goes there to study with him. And here's something: being in France, learning French would certainly benefit Patton the rest of his life, because we could even move on. World War One ends up coming shortly thereafter, and he's in France. Oh, no. You want to go chronologically, Andy? So what was
Yeah,
in
we should
between
mention
those
Pancho. We
two?
should mention Pancho Villa
That's right.
in
Yes. Yes.
1916, where he led his motorized, pursuit of Pancho Villa, and was personally involved in killing like three of Pancho Villa's deputies. Right?
Yeah, the
He
main
wounded three
guy,
of them, and
Cardenas. Yeah, well,
yeah,
Cardenas, his right hand man, he ended up killing, and that was the first time he met Blackjack Pershing, who was his role model in real life, like this commanding presence who imposed discipline. Everything Patton would be known for later, many things Patton would be
yeah.
known for later, he learned from Blackjack Pershing. And of course,
Lafayette,
the
we are
two,
here. Right? Lafayette, we are here. Didn't Pershing say that when the American
that's right.
Expeditionary Force, arrived
Yes,
in France? And by the way,
yes.
wasn't Patton's sister engaged to Pershing for a while?
Yes, she was engaged until the war broke out, and then they never, culminated the marriage. But during the war, Patton learns the importance of tanks. We talked about Churchill a couple of weeks ago. Similarly, knowing that tanks are game changers in the war, and he, similar to Churchill, Patton was a cavalry officer. That was like his first training, and even during I don't know if it was before or during the war, the Patton sword. He actually invented a kind of sword. That's how important it was to him. And so in the war, he's there. He gets basically a Purple Heart. America comes in late in the war, and basically that's how that war is won.
Yeah, and Patton
Note to future
commanded.
historians.
Right. Patton
Yeah, go ahead. Go
commanded the
ahead, Andy.
U.S. Tank School. Patton commanded the U.S. Tank School in France, and then led tanks into combat and was wounded, in the war. And I think, won the Purple Heart for
Yes,
that.
got the
So he
Purple Heart.
had,
Yes,
yeah, so he had invaluable experience in tank warfare in World War One that served him very well between the wars, and then subsequently in World War Two.
that's
Right?
right. And
Because
actually, let's
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. I was going to change. I was going to go backtrack just a little bit on a personal note. His marriage, that he met Beatrice. Ayer, who was the daughter of a famous British Bostonian industrialist, very wealthy. Patton himself was from a wealthy family. He grew up in California, Southern California,
Right. That's right.
around Los Angeles and the Catalina Island, which is where swimming. He became a very good swimmer, and so they married, and then the war broke out, and he has one daughter. Then a couple of years later, has another daughter, and then eventually a son as well. So he's got the personal side happening, that he's a married man. Then the war breaks out. Yes, he gets a Purple Heart during World War One. And then after the war's over, he, similar to Churchill, he kind of has this wilderness years because the military is slashed, the budget is slashed for the military, and this is during the Roaring Twenties, and he's basically not really doing much. He's studying law and is it unfortunately, even he turns to womanizing, and he's just doing these other things that are not, just not good for him. If we could say something, Andy, just about his personality, he was built for war and not civilian life. And you and I are built for civilian life. We're not built for
Yeah.
war. I am not.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. I am not.
Absolutely.
I have friends. I have childhood friends who are like that, and I totally admire them. But because that's not who I am. And so knowing Patton's context here, not excusing at all his deficiencies, but just saying that while there wasn't a war happening, he was just not at his best. It's that simple.
No, no, I understand. Reminds me, of the first fictional character we celebrated on the Hero Show, John Hersey and I, a year ago, Sherlock Holmes. Because
That's
I
right.
love the
Resorts to
I love the
drugs.
Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, I love the Sherlock Holmes story. I love Arthur Conan Doyle. And when he's on a case, Dr. Watson says his energy is inexhaustible. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just all in, and this is what he lives for. This is what he's made for. But when there's no case, there's no crime for him to investigate. He's suffers from lassitude. Doesn't know what to do with himself. He shoots cocaine. He's just out of his element. And I think Patton in real life, I think you're absolutely right. When there's no war for a hard bitten military commander like Patton, he doesn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. It's sad, but he saves a family. He's stationed in Hawaii. He meets General MacArthur, and there's like a yacht. There's some kind of catastrophe on a yacht, and 3 or 4 women or their daughters are going to drown, and Patton goes in and saves their lives. So he still has this heroistic aspect, even as a civilian. He still is able to be a hero in a sense. And then,
Well, he's certainly a hero
uh,
to the kids and their families whose lives he saved. That's for
yes,
sure. Right?
yes, yeah, absolutely. And while he's in Hawaii, he's seeing the Japanese buildup. He's seeing, witnessing this, and wondering, what's going to happen. And then similarly, we go into the 30s and then the late 30s, once Germany is starting to, take their
Yeah.
action,
Yeah, we should mention a
the
couple of
stage
points.
becomes set. Yeah.
Right, right. And if I remember correctly, Patton predicted a Japanese assault on Pearl Harbor on Hawaii,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
I
he
think
did.
he did. He
Yes.
was absolutely right about, because he saw, the growing militarism of the emperors, that military dictatorship in Japan, and the brutality of so often the Japanese soldiers in China. The rape of Nanking as
Yep.
Exhibit A. But before we get to World War II, we should mention that between the wars, Patton was one thing military that he was able to do is that he was a leading figure in developing the U.S. Army armored warfare doctrine, and
Yes.
that certainly was enormously helpful to him in the Second World War. So that was the one thing military that it was a great accomplishment between the wars for Patton.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Thanks for bringing that up, because it pays off. It pays
Yeah,
off in
absolutely.
World War II.
Sure does. Read
So
Rommel's
Steve,
book like he read Rommel's book like he said, right? And became an expert in tank warfare himself.
mhm.
That's cool. I love the line in the movie. I read your book, you magnificent bastard. He says.
So yeah, so let's go to the actual war, and if you want, we can go back and forth between the film and real life, because basically the film starts right when he is sent to Northern
North,
Africa. Okay,
right, right,
that's the first. That's his first mission. I think Tunisia, and it's right after. And this is here's where the film is. It's fabulous because you are angry. You see these dead American soldiers, and their rings are being stolen. Their uniforms are being ripped off by these poor, starving Tunisians, uh, and Patton comes on, and he's like, bury these men properly. Uh, I don't want them to be forgotten the way prior, soldiers have been forgotten. And he sees the lack of discipline everywhere. And the first thing, he was a stickler for discipline. And first thing he does is, wear your helmet, starts finding people, making sure they take care of themselves, and instills this order, discipline, and then his method of going on the attack
right.
and not
And the
waiting.
U.S.
He Go ahead.
military, without doubt, was woefully unprepared for World War II.
Yes.
And by the way,
Yes.
you study American history and say, the United States was like unprepared for every war that it ended up being involved in, which is one truth that gives the lie to this claim that the United States is this imperialist power. The country was woefully unprepared, for almost every war it was involved in. Certainly World War II, and the movie shows that accurately. That after the Americans were defeated decisively by the Germans at Kasserine Pass, Patton's put in command, and he, like you said, Rob, he whips these guys into shape. He takes these farm boys or these city boys, wherever they were from, and he makes them into soldiers, and he makes them into an outstanding fighting force against the Germans in North Africa. And
Hmm. Hmm.
and Omar Bradley at that time uh, was his subordinate. Bradley went on
Yes.
to become his commanding officer later on, but he was Patton's subordinate at that time. And Bradley was what they call him, the common man soldier or something, or
Journeyman.
some
Journeyman.
yeah he
Yeah.
yeah he was much more under control. He wasn't as impulsive as Patton. He wasn't a foul mouthed
Not bold.
swearing.
No, he was right, but he wasn't bold either.
Right, right,
He went by the book, and he's brilliantly played by Carl Malden.
right.
Um, so, but even before then, Andy, the first scene, he's in Morocco, and there's pomp and circumstances, the military troops there, in their ancient garb. He's impressed by that, and he says, "I wish American troops were like as orderly as they were." And then the premier or somebody who gives him like a ribbon. What do you think of Morocco? And do you remember what he says?
I
He
saw the
goes,
movie recently, but no.
he
What did
goes,
he
"I
say?
love it. It's a blend of the Bible and Hollywood." So it's the Bible with the ancient wardrobe and the
Right.
and the dust and everything, and Hollywood because all the colorful pomp and circumstances. It's like perfect.
Right, like it was staged for a film, right? Yeah, right,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So now first battlefield action. He's preparing them, and boom, they get their victory in Northern Africa. Next step is Sicily, which Patton, as a historian, knows that Sicily is pivotal. Palermo, he says, is the most conquered city in history. And he has a plan, but Monty, you talked about Montgomery, in the film had a different plan, and the goal was to make it to Messina, which is in the northern tip of Sicily, close to Italy. And basically, Patton's goal is to beat. He wanted to beat Montgomery to Messina for two reasons. First of all, Britain was they were critical of the American soldiers. They called them they equated American soldiers with like the Italians compared to the Nazis. Like the British were up here, the Nazis were up here and the Italians were down here. Similarly, the British thought they were up here and the Americans were down here. And Patton did not like that. He did not like that at all. So he wanted to beat Montgomery to Messina and claim it, be one of the historical victors at Messina, but not put his men at risk. Here's where I think the film gets it wrong, because they show him as this impulsive guy who's insubordinate and is willing to put his soldiers at risk,
Right.
which he does not.
Unnecessary risks. There's no avoiding risks in war.
Yes.
Unnecessary risks. Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. There's a great scene in the movie, when Patton comes swaggering ashore on Sicily. And he's carrying that swagger stick, and he's got his ivory-handled pistols. And the German generals, they're watching the films of this, and they know what Montgomery's like, and now Patton too, and the German generals said now the Allies have two prima donnas, that they have to deal with.
You're right.
Patton both. You're right.
But the first thing they said, Andy, is he's big. Look how tall he is. Okay, so so he's an imposing physical figure, which Monty wasn't. I'm calling him Monty because that's who everyone called him.
Yeah, the Brits called him Monty, and he was a great general. He was a prima donna also, but he was both of these guys were publicity hounds. They wanted to be known as heroes, but they were both great generals.
And it's a great scene in the movie because you see Monty's marching band going to, they're in Messina. And you see the British flags, and then they turn the corner, and then you hear the Stars and Stripes Forever, and Patton standing there smiling, like, man, we beat you. Where are you guys?
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, these guys are glory hounds, but I think you're right. The little I know about Patton's actual life, I think you're right. I think why his troops had tremendous respect for him. I don't think he put them in unnecessary risks just to glorify himself. We took the risks necessary, to use Patton's own colorful terminology. We take the risk necessary to beat the hell out of these bastards. It's the kind of thing that Patton would. No poor bastard ever won a war by dying for his country, right? He won the war by making the other poor bastards die for their country, right?
Perfect.
This is Patton.
That's Patton.
Yeah.
So two incidents in Sicily that we have to talk about because they definitely had an impact on his life, and one of them definitely was a mistake. So Patton, he knew it was necessary to go to infirmaries where there were wounded and dying soldiers, and it took a lot out of him. But he knew it was necessary, and they cover this well in the movie that how he kneels down next to one guy. Where are you from? California. And he's like, oh, so am I. Another one you can't even see. You could tell he's blind. He's got and Patton just whispers in his ear and puts the Purple Heart on him. And then he sees the other soldier. In the film, they only show one. There were two in real life, but in films, you have to condense concretes. And the soldier's just shivering, and Patton sees what's wrong with you. He's like, I can't go back out there. And Patton's like, are you kidding? These brave men here are all injured in battle, and you're no cowards in my army. He slaps him, knocks his helmet off, and the medical staff is appalled. Patton's ready to shoot the guy, and he tells him, put him out in the front line. Let him know. Of course, this was battle fatigue, shell shock, what's now PTSD, all of these psychological things that prevent somebody from going out and fighting. And Patton had no patience for that. He didn't have.
I got to say, as a personal note, Rod, I'd have been the first guy who was shell shocked. in the brutal, brutal combat and warfare. I don't know how these guys. I don't know how these guys psychologically survive, and it's not an
Yeah,
accident. So many of these guys, these heroes who have the courage to
yeah,
face enemy machine gun fire, they are
hmm,
psychologically scarred for the rest of their lives. And we know today
yeah,
a lot of combat veterans commit suicide. Um,
yeah. Very
some
sad. It's very
really sad,
sad.
really sad, because these guys are heroes, but some they're
So while,
understandably scarred. And Patton, yeah,
yeah,
Patton was a great commander, but he didn't have that understanding. He might have loved
no,
warfare, but most of us don't, And reminds me of a
yeah.
great
So
line. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
just kind of wrapping this up. So Eisenhower finds out he's ready to take action. Bradley, everyone, all the hierarchy are appalled at this action, and they force Patton to apologize, which he does to the entire everyone under his command, personally to the two soldiers. Doesn't come out in the American media until several months later, and then even the Americans are outraged by it.
Yeah,
But Andy, here's the thing: the
I
parents.
kept it I kept it quiet. Right. I didn't want
He
I
kept
didn't
it
want the
quiet
media publicity.
initially, and then a journalist published it. But
Yeah,
the parents
yeah,
of both soldiers who got slapped, they said they didn't like what happened to their son, but they were happy that Patton was in command. Okay, so that tells you something about the man's ability as a commander to get results.
right. I think there was
And
pressure on there was I think there was pressure on Ike to relieve Patton of command. And didn't he say, echoing what Lincoln had said about Grant? I can't fire this guy. He fights,
he
right?
fights, he
Yeah,
wins.
fights,
Exactly.
wins,
He
right?
wins. And then even the Germans find out and they're like, they in the movie, they're like, wait a minute, of course they're not going to fire him. They're for slapping someone, only for slapping someone, they're going to fire him. No, that's a decoy. That's what the
Right.
German commander's
He's
saying.
their best
That's
general.
yeah,
He's their best general. The Allies can't be so stupid, as to do that. So yeah, the
that's right.
Germans were very,
That's
very
right.
skeptical, of
Yeah.
it,
And then the
and
second
rightfully so. Go ahead.
yep. And then the second incident is in northern Sicily where they are on their way to Messina, but they're in a crunch, trying to escape because the Germans are coming from to attack from the north, and um, there are two mules on a bridge on a very narrow bridge, and they're blocking the traffic. They're blocking the American escape, and they're trying to push the mules aside. And the owner's yelling in Italian, and Patton just walks over and shoots both mules and has his staff just throw them overboard so the Americans can escape. This might sound callous. What's more important in life, and especially in this war? Is it human life or is it two mules? And by the way, American taxpayers ended up paying the owner of those mules for his loss. So, but Patton took heat for that as well, for doing something, quote, inhumane.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm an animal lover. I feel sorry for the poor mules, but yeah, your first Pat is the commander of U.S. Army. His first loyalty has got to be to his guys, to his men. They're the ones who have to live. So Patton's decisive. He did what he had to
Yes.
do, and he took the heat. He took the heat for
Yeah.
it. But he, I don't know if I people out there, I don't know if you know, that was Eisenhower's nickname. Right? Everybody called him Ike, right? And when he was president, saw these
Dwight
years later,
Eisenhower. Yes.
we like Ike, everything with the campaign slogans. But anyway, Ike might have taken, might have been more pressure to fire Patton over this, or to pull him out of his command position. I'm not sure about that, but Ike wasn't gonna relieve Patton. Reprimand
Yeah.
him, have long talks with him, but you can't take. He's your best field commander, and you're in a war to the death against the Nazis. You can't
Yes.
relieve him of command.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So now we come to D-Day, and the preparation for D-Day, and what is Patton's role in that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? 'Cause
Yeah,
they,
yeah.
yeah,
Why do you describe this?
yeah, well, because amongst the Allied High Command, there was very mixed feelings about Patton. On the one hand, he is your best field commander, but he's also he's a little bit out of control. He's out of control. He's impulsive, and he's prone to making these errors that become public relations disasters, and stuff like that. So anyhow, but Ike and the Allied High Command realized Patton is the Allied commander most feared by the Germans, and so it is a brilliant, and rightfully so. In a brilliant, intelligence operation, they set up a phony army at Dover, on the British coast, with Patton supposedly in command. Trying to deceive the Germans, and successfully deceiving the Germans into believing that the invasion was going to come at Calais. Whereas of course we know the real invasion was at Normandy. So well, I think Patton was somewhere else. He wasn't in Dover. He was actually training troops somewhere else in England. But the High Command said, keep a low profile. We got to convince the Germans that you're in Dover, and they did. And it was a brilliant intelligence coup. They deceived the
Yes.
Germans into believing that this phony army they set up dummies and stuff at Dover, and they did that. The Germans had large forces at Calais ready to repel the invasion supposedly going to be led by George Patton, and it was brilliantly done by the Allied High Command, and really
Yeah,
taking
even though,
advantage. Really taking advantage of how much the Germans feared Patton.
yes, I think even in their wire transmissions, like they were leaking in their wires. Patton's over here, he's getting ready, and the Germans would even hear that. They were even deceiving them that way. So,
Well,
so
it's
D-Day
always been
worked.
said. It's long been said that the best intelligence and counterintelligence operations were the British and the Americans. And this was one instance. The British, of course, cracked the German Enigma code. The Americans cracked the
Yes,
Japanese code. And this was one real intelligence coup for the Allies. The Germans were
that's right.
were just unprepared at Normandy. They just were unprepared.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So actually, Andy, I'd like to backtrack just for 1 second, going to what Patton told his soldiers. I have from his own book, War as I Knew It. This is a letter that he writes August 22nd, 1943. He says, Soldiers of the 7th Army, born at sea, baptized in blood, crowned with victory, in the course of 38 days of incessant battle and unceasing labor, you have added a glorious chapter to the history of war. Pitted against the best Germans and Italians could offer, you have been unfailingly successful. The rapidity of your dash, which culminated with the capture of Palermo, was equaled only by the dogged tenacity with which you stormed Troina and captured Messina. Every man in the army deserves equal credit. The enduring valor of the infantry and the impetuous ferocity of the tanks were matched by the tireless clamor of our destroying guns. The engineers performed prodigies in the construction and maintenance of impossible roads over impassable country. The services of the maintenance and supply performed a miracle. The signal corps laid over 10,000 miles of wire, and the medical department evacuated and carried for our sick and wounded. And so then he lists how many captured and killed, and he says ends by saying, but your victory has a significance above and beyond its physical aspect. You have destroyed the prestige of the enemy. And it's sent to the president, Eisenhower, General Alexander, and Montgomery. They all have congratulated you. Your fame shall never die. G.S. Patton. This the
Yeah, that's
man
good
loved
stuff.
his he loved his soldiers. He demanded the most of himself, and then he demanded that much of them as well. So
and he
okay,
commanded
you
loyalty
finished.
from his men. Right? They
Yes,
they were they
that,
were immensely loyal to Patton, from what I've heard.
absolutely. Yep, absolutely, Andy. So now moving, the momentum has shifted within the war, and now we come to the Battle of the Bulge,
Well, first,
which
let's say,
is,
for the
yeah,
Normandy landing is successful in large part because
yes,
the Allied intelligence operation deceived the Germans, and then Patton is put in command of the Third Army in France, right?
that's right.
And he just, I mean Patton was, by this time, was a brilliant armored commander. I
Tactician.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
strategist and
hmm
tactician, and he was, he simply, a number of great generals historically were offensive. I mean, Alexander, Napoleon, they believed the best defense was to be on offense, and Patton
Yes.
is certainly in that school. You attack, 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 boldly, like you said. Before, about Bradley. General Bradley was a very, very competent general, but he was much more circumspect. Patton was
Yeah.
bold, and Patton went for the enemy's jugular, and he led his armored command across France and into Germany. He said if Ike and the Allied High Command had led him, he'd have been the first one into Germany.
Yeah.
And I think that's true.
And
You know,
also, Andy,
about
that's how the
What?
Germans took over all of Europe, was through the Blitzkrieg, by
Blitzkrieg,
being
right?
on the offensive, being on the attack. So he did to the Germans what the Germans did to the rest of Europe. And yeah, one of his expressions was, the ones who kind of dig and fight in ditches, they're basically digging their own ditches for their own graves, and
Right.
that's why he was on the offensive. That was absolutely his mode of victory, and decisive, decisive decision making, uh, and often when the command came down from above that he could not do something, then he abided by that. But one of the pivotal scenes in the film, which is accurately depicted, is when they have a council, and Eisenhower's leading the council about what to do. Bastogne is the place that they need to get to, and it's December now. It's freezing cold, and in the past, the Germans wouldn't fight in the winters, but Patton knew they would, and he comes up with three contingency plans, and basically says, "I can be there in 48 hours." And Eisenhower looks at him and like, "You kidding me?" And no one else even wanted to do it, or even had a backup plan. And Patton walks into the room with three plans, and one of the other things, Andy, because he was so good, he always lacked the supplies, the gasoline, and ammunition, because he went so fast that the reinforcements weren't even able to arrive, because he would be there too fast, and that's why Eisenhower was
That's
like,
right.
"No, no, wait until December 22nd," and Patton's like, "No, we'll be there in 48 hours." And
Yeah,
sure
this
enough,
was this was
that's
a, this was a this was an astonishing achievement by Patton. The 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, were holding Bastogne, one of those brutal battles. It was in Belgium, right? It's one
yeah,
of the brutal
yes,
battles in the war. I remember when I was a kid, the Germans had them surrounded and outnumbered and outgunned and everything, and the Germans told the American command, you have to surrender, and was General McAuliffe, right, sent back the word nuts.
one word, nuts.
Yeah, nuts. General McAuliffe said, and the German commander, nuts. It's an American colloquialism. He was probably fluent in English, but didn't know American, idioms, everything. Nuts. What does that mean? So the 101st wouldn't surrender. These are tough guys, man. These are real hard rocks, but they were
Yeah,
besieged. Patton was able to pull, I think it was like tens of thousands of troops out of frontline combat. He had the plans already made, like you said.
yeah.
You know, for
What was the game
contingency
plan? Do you
plan.
remember when he walked out of the meeting? Do you remember what he picks up the phone? Play ball.
Yeah, play ball, right? That's right. He said, "Yeah, that's
Right?
right.
It's a shame
Play
because
ball."
people today don't know the importance of baseball. We mentioned this with Babe Ruth, but the importance of
Yeah,
how important baseball was in American culture. Just two words: play ball. Which means that's
right.
it. We are on. Let's go.
Right.
Mhm.
He
Go ahead,
pulls
Andy. I
tens of
interrupted you.
thousands of troops out of frontline combat because he has the contingency plans already made, for this, ready for this for the Battle of the Bulge, and he roars up to Bastogne, and in the dead of winter and the snow and everything, and he relieves the 101st Airborne Division at this crucial crossroads. The Germans had to have it in order to
Yeah,
advance, and
yeah.
Patton's Third Army just just overwhelmed them, at that point. And the Germans, at that point, the Germans were defeated. They had thrown all their reserves into the Battle
Broke
of
their
the
spirit.
Bulge. Yeah.
Yep.
That, and they didn't have enough gasoline, right? The Germans were short on gasoline, but they threw all their reserves into one last ditch effort to repel the
Yeah,
Allies, and Patton was the one who basically broke their back at Bastogne.
that's right.
He was able to get
Absolutely,
there so
Andy.
quickly. Yeah, again, Patton's nobody understood tank warfare better than Patton. Maybe not as well as Patton, and the mobility that you were talking about, the speed with which Patton would strike. And I don't think the Germans
Yeah.
could possibly expect under those weather conditions that Patton's relief force could arrive from the south so quickly. Pull the guys out of frontline combat, and then drive how many miles to Bastogne? Was it hundreds of miles from where Patton
Yeah,
was? I don't remember
it was a couple of hundred
the
miles. Yeah.
yeah, get there that
Hmm.
quickly to relieve the
48 hours.
101st Airborne. Yeah, before the German superior numbers and tanks could overwhelm them. Yeah, I think that may have been Patton's greatest achievement in the Second World War.
He called it that himself, Andy. He
Okay.
actually called it that himself. So I, on a personal note, I have a story that I didn't know when I was young. I had an uncle named Rocco Carioni, who was a medic in Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge. And medics are the same. They're the same as army, but they carry like 60 pounds of medical equipment with them, known for their intelligence and split second decision making. And in Bastogne, they set up a church as like a hospital, and the church got bombed, and my uncle Rocky was knocked out in a coma. His medic buddy was killed, and he was out in the coma for a couple of weeks, and ended up with a Purple Heart, and he's buried in Calverton out in Long Island, and it says Purple Heart. But he loved Patton. The thing, I only heard the story. I didn't know this when he was alive because he didn't talk to a teenager. I was a teenager at the time for much of our relationship, and but the man loved Patton and he literally went to battle for him in this most important victory in up to that time, Andy. I think this was in world history. This was the most important victory, the Battle of the Bulge, and still possibly to this day. And so Patton was revered by the majority, not every single one of his soldiers, but
Well, nobody
um,
is, right.
yeah,
Nobody is.
you're right. You're right. And he even says, "I want them to respect me or to fear me. I don't want them to fear the Germans. I want them to fear me." All right.
Right.
I mean, is that a great quote?
Yes. Yeah. That is. And on a personal note, also, my uncle, my father's brother, Herbert
Hmm.
Bernstein, um, was an engineer, and he served in the Army Corps of Engineers in the Third Army with Patton. And he talked about
Yeah.
building the pontoon bridges across any number of rivers so that that Patton's tanks could roar across and keep
Amazing.
advancing. Yeah, and
Hmm.
he also admired Patton. And by the way, just went on after the war, moved to St. Louis. He was an aeronautical engineer, or yeah, it was aeronautical aerospace. I can't remember, but he worked for the McDonnell Corporation in St. Louis, which he worked on the capsule in the Mercury for the Mercury program that went when the first U.S.
Wow.
astronauts went into
Hmm.
space. Alan Shepard
Nice.
and Gus Grissom
Hmm.
and then John Glenn. But yeah, he also respected Patton enormously as a superb field commander.
Yeah.
Attack, attack, attack. What does he say in the movies? Riding by in his tanks. I'm on my way to Berlin, boys. I'm gonna shoot that paper hanging son of a bitch myself, or something. He says about Hitler, something like
Exactly,
that.
word for word, Andy. You got it, word for word. That's what he said. His mission, Patton's mission, was to personally go to Berlin and shoot Hitler himself. He wanted that. He wanted to do that. That was what he felt he was built for, and Hitler beat him to the punch.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Well,
Hitler killed
well,
himself.
well. The Allied commanders, FDR, and then Truman, and they weren't going to let the Americans or British be first into Berlin anyway. The Soviets would. They made that terrible error, of letting
Yes.
Stalin's forces into Berlin first. So that so Patton Patton wasn't going to be able to do it even if Hitler had committed suicide, unless he went against
Yeah.
all orders, which it was not impossible for him, and beat the Russians into Berlin, which he probably could have done.
He could have done, and if we go again to the movie, he I think this was also kind of a distortion that he certainly didn't want the Russians there. He feared a Cold War. He knew that they were pretty much one step above barbarians, and they should not be there. He wanted to push them back to Russia, and but the diplomats, Eisenhower and the British. I mean, remember there was one speech he gave about the Anglo-American alliance. We're going to rule the world, and they're like, "Well, what about the Russians?" He's like, "No, they don't count." And in the film, there's like, I want a war with them right now. We have all of our guys here." And this is where they dismiss him as a crazy warmonger, but he could see the future, and also he knew that communism wasn't freedom. It's not. It,
Yeah, he was under
it's
no
not.
illusions, right? He was under no
Yeah,
illusions about Russians or communism. Now, I'm unclear. In real life, did Patton want to take out the Russians right then? I know in the film
yeah.
they show it that way.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did because he knew that this would be
Yeah,
a future. He's like, we have everybody here now. Let's just do this
right.
right. Because why are they in Berlin? Why are they
Yeah,
this far?
absolutely. No, he's right. Make a clean sweep. He recognized the communists are as bad as the Nazis. We have a massive army here. We might never have it again in Europe. Of course, the Russians do too. But Patton recognized American air power is the decisive factor. The Russians didn't have an air force,
No,
to match the Americans
no.
and the British, and they could have defeated the Russians even without
Mhm.
without nuclear intimidation. Without intimidating them using the atomic
Right.
bomb, could have defeated them in conventional warfare and obviated perhaps large parts of the Cold War that ensued. So. Yeah, I mean, I can understand Patton, but it was hopeless. Understandably, nobody in America wanted to go to war with Russia. War is hell. We've just gone through this long, exhausting, bloody war with the Nazis. Now we have another war with the communists. Nobody wanted to go, to another war. Whether even if Pat was right, and I think Churchill was sympathetic to that point of view, also, wasn't he? That
Well, he
that the
was, and we
Soviets were,
mentioned that. Yeah, and
yeah, yeah,
and it's interesting because Patton and Churchill post-war did not get their way, but they saw the danger. They were visionaries. I think this is where, because Patton studied war history so well, he could predict things and he could see trends, and he saw that Russia was a brutal. It was not an ally in the sense of a freedom loving country. They just they were just a different breed of totalitarianism, and
right.
sure, it helped the Allied victory, but we knew that fight was coming, down the road, and Patton wanted to cut it off right right at root. So if we go with the movie, that's kind of the lad. Then he's stripped of the Third Army. He's no longer the commander, and basically his life is over as far as any kind of glory, because there are no more wars for him to win. And but again, talking about the impact of the film, which, by the way, Francis Ford Coppola, the director of The Godfather and many other movies, was a co-writer of the film. And thank you. Here's George C.
Yeah.
Scott, as we mentioned earlier, as the winner of Best Actor, Best Picture. This is 1970. So what's happening in America during 1970?
Vietnam
Vietnam
War.
War, and
Right.
the hatred of war. But the film wants to show the best general in some kind of way that can make him, even more larger than life and more memorable. But what I think they get wrong is, yeah, his impulse control, his mood swings. I think they just blow it out of proportion. They sensationalized it.
Mhm.
And they show him like as kind of a martinet. He's a stickler for the uniform, just this picture itself. But this is what meant discipline to Patton, and he was not unprincipled. They kind of show him as being unprincipled, and I disagree with that. And one way is the library. We mentioned earlier that he was a voracious reader despite the dyslexia. So that's why I'm somewhat mixed about the film. And then I don't know if you want to say anything else there, Andy. But I don't know
Uh,
if you saw the follow up, the
Oh,
last
the
days
Patton's last days of no,
yeah.
I did not. I just want to point out
Okay.
the ivory
Yeah. Go
handle
ahead.
pistol. The ivory handle
Yes.
pistol at Patton's side. The one thing I always admired about Patton is he just had personal charisma. The swagger stick
Yes.
and the ivory handle pistol and the profanity and just he's a warrior. He's not a diplomat.
Yes.
You wouldn't want to send Patton for peaceful negotiations with somebody. You send Patton when war breaks out. Then you send Patton to head your army
Yes.
and crush and crush the enemy. And he was a warrior and very principled. He was good. He was going to win. He was going to defeat the bad guys, Nazis in this case, and not take unnecessary risks for his men. When somebody asked him about the losses and everything, he said some words to the effect that the much worse losses if we slow down. The
Yes.
way to
Yes.
minimize our losses is to, like you mentioned, blitzkrieg the enemy. He perfected the blitzkrieg that the Germans initiated, and just keep the enemy on their heels. This is the way to
Yeah.
minimize American losses and win the war. And he's right. So he was a principled
Yeah.
he was a principled man. Who was a warrior, and then that's
Yeah.
that's who Patton was.
Yeah. And what does he say? One of the last scenes, as he's walking away, we liberated 12,000 cities and towns throughout all of Europe, and we inflicted 1.5 million casualties. These numbers are
Yeah,
they're
they're
just
astonishing.
staggering.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
yeah.
astonishing. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Well,
just wrapping up his life is
and
he comes to America, and in 1945, after the war is mostly glorified but also vilified, certainly. We know by what kinds of people,
sure.
intelligentsia and leftists. But then they send him back to Europe for um, denazification of, I shouldn't put quotes in it because it was actual denazification. And he is, December 1945, he's the day before he's ready to come back to the US. He's kind of like tired of war. He goes out on a fox hunt, and a freak accident in his car, and it stops short, and his head goes right into the barrier glass, and He's paralyzed from the neck down and only lasts like 10 more days
Yeah,
before he
an,
dies.
an ignominious death. That he led tanks in combat and
Yeah,
everything, and in these brutal, in brutal warfare, and then he dies in a peacetime car, or dies from the injury suffered in a peacetime car accident.
yeah,
So I'm sure Patton would have wanted to go out in combat with a bullet, a bullet in his head,
that's
or
right.
something. You
Yeah,
die with your boots on, because he's a warrior down to his toenails.
yes, yep,
Nevertheless, that in no way minimizes the extraordinary accomplishments in the Second World War of America's greatest commander. Maybe we should close with what we started with. I think I'm no military strategist or expert or anything, but
me
just as
neither.
a
Me neither.
yeah. So if there's military men who really know the field, you please correct me on this. But I think the people in the best situation to judge Patton were his enemies, the Germans.
Yes,
And
yes,
they von Rundstedt, leading German general when the war was over, said about Patton simply, he's the best you got. And
yep,
certainly talking about the Americans, and perhaps the Allies in general. I think Patton and Montgomery would have to be the two candidates. I may be a
yeah,
prejudiced American. I would put Patton narrowly ahead of Monty, both great generals.
yeah,
But Runstead said he's the best. He's the best you have, or the best you got. And I think that's my limited knowledge. That's an accurate assessment as far as battlefield
yeah,
commanders go. I no, I think Patton was the man in World War II,
yeah.
and I think
If I
and
could
I
just
think
say,
go,
Andy,
go ahead, go ahead.
I'm sorry, before we salute,
Yeah.
West Point. There's a larger than life statue of him in West Point, and the quote is, "Pursue your enemy with the utmost audacity, and do not take counsel of your fears."
That's Patton
Boom.
all over, isn't it?
To
That's
that, I
Patton.
could,
All
yes.
right. Well, then I think we should salute General Patton, and thank you for your service, General, in defeating
Yes,
a terrible enemy, a very formidable enemy. And so, Robert, I think I'm going to wish you and everybody out there in Hero Land to have a
you
heroic
too,
day,
Andy.
and all of us, let's strive to lead a more heroic life. So we'll see you next week on
Absolutely.
the Hero Show. Should we tell everybody who we're going to discuss next week?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's give a
Yeah,
spoiler.
yeah. My all-time favorite hero, the
Mine
inimitable
too.
Howard Rourke. Right. So our second fictional hero, we discussed Sherlock Holmes a year ago, but my all-time favorite hero, the great Howard Rourke from the Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. So
Yes.
Rob and I will be back next week on the Hero Show. We'll see you next week, everybody.
See you then. Bye bye.